A few weeks ago, Intel reported something pretty shocking. They lost $16.6 billion in just one quarter. That's not just bad, it's by far the biggest loss in the company's history. To put it in perspective, it's about 22 times bigger than the profits AMD made during the same period. Some of that loss came from one-time charges, but it gets worse. Intel was kicked out of the Dow Jones Index that same week after being a part of it for 25 years. They got replaced by none other than Nvidia. So yeah, Intel is going through an insanely rough time, and that's happening while the rest of the chip industry is having one of its biggest booms ever. But here's the weird part: if you check Intel's stock chart, you'd notice something strange. On the very day they announced this disaster, their stock price jumped 15%. Sounds crazy, right? But it actually makes sense if you understand the bigger picture. There's a concept called the Valley of Death, usually used to describe what startups go through. A company pours a ton of money into building their product, but they often run out of cash before they can start making real revenue. Most don't survive that valley. Intel, of course, is no startup. Not long ago, they were still the world's biggest chip maker. But when Pat Gelsinger became CEO in 2021, he launched a massive turnaround plan, one so ambitious that it threw Intel into chaos. The company basically created its own valley of death. So far, it's been mostly downhill, and it's been painful to watch. But maybe, just maybe, they've hit rock bottom. The big question now: can they climb their way back up? Before it all went south. To understand where Intel is today, you have to understand where they came from. TSMC, the world's largest chip manufacturer, has about 76,000 employees. Nvidia, the leading chip designer, has around 30,000. And ARM, who makes the world's most popular CPU designs, has about 6,000. Even combined, they don't match Intel's headcount, which is wild, right? But historically, Intel was a totally different beast. While Nvidia focuses mostly on design, and TSMC on manufacturing, Intel did everything: design, manufacture, architecture, all in-house. That full-stack approach worked brilliantly for a long time. Their x86 instruction set became the global standard, basically meaning that almost any computer could run Windows, macOS, Linux, and millions of apps without breaking compatibility. Switching away from x86 was so expensive and painful that most companies simply didn't bother. Intel and AMD shared this market, but Intel had a huge edge. They were not just bigger, but better. Until around 2015, Intel's chip factories, called fabs, were the best in the world, usually a whole generation ahead of TSMC and Samsung. This manufacturing lead meant Intel chips were simply faster and more efficient than anyone else's. They were also incredibly profitable because, unlike companies that had to pay someone like TSMC to manufacture chips, which costs a fortune, Intel could do it themselves and keep the margins. In short, Intel wasn't just winning, they were dominating. The slow decline. The first cracks started to appear in the early 2000s, but they were small at first. In 2005, Steve Jobs announced that Apple Macs would switch to Intel's x86 chips, a massive win. But soon after, Jobs asked Intel's then CEO, Paul Otellini, if they wanted to make chips for Apple's next big thing, the iPhone. Otellini said no. At the time, it made sense. Intel was busy doubling down on x86, and the iPhone wasn't a sure thing yet. But in hindsight, it was one of the biggest missed opportunities in tech history. The smartphone boom changed everything, and Intel missed the boat. They tried to catch up with Atom chips for Android phones, but by then, everyone had standardized on ARM. And Intel's chips had compatibility problems. Still, Intel had the PC market. And then, they had the cloud boom, where data centers needed tons of powerful CPUs, exactly Intel's wheelhouse. They made mountains of money, for a while. But behind the scenes, the trouble continued. Intel used to update their chip designs and manufacturing roughly every 18 months, a rhythm called tick-tock. But after 2014, that rhythm broke. They kept using the same process, 14 nanometers, for years, while TSMC kept moving forward. By 2019, Intel was still stuck while TSMC had blown past them. Intel's manufacturing, once their secret weapon, became a huge liability. Their chips started running hotter and slower than the competition. No matter how good Intel's designs were, they couldn't make up for falling behind in manufacturing. Being vertically integrated is amazing until a key piece falls apart. Then it's a disaster. The crash. Intel's troubles gave AMD, their longtime underdog rival, a rare chance to strike back. And AMD took full advantage. Meanwhile, computing itself was shifting. CPUs were no longer the centerpiece of performance. GPUs, especially for AI and graphics, were becoming way more important. Intel had tried to expand into other chip types over the years, like FPGAs, wireless chips, and even special memory tech, but nothing really stuck. They were still mainly a CPU company, in a world where CPUs mattered less and less. And despite their size, Intel couldn't escape the consequences forever. Decay that had been slow and hidden for years finally caught up with them all at once. But under Pat Gelsinger, things took a dramatic turn. Pat changed everything. Intel, under his leadership, started spending aggressively everything it had, and more. But he didn't just throw money around. He also cut deep, stopping dividends, laying off thousands, closing down businesses that weren't profitable yet, and selling off major assets. For example, Intel sold 49% of a major chip fabrication plant in Ireland to a private equity fund, bringing in a whopping $11 billion. Their self-driving chip company, Mobileye, went public and Intel cashed in by selling a big chunk of their shares.